Brian Tomlinson is a dedicated husband and father of 4 and an active parishioner at St. Simon. He volunteers in a lot of school and parish activities. Over his career, he was an industry leader in administrative investigations, serving higher education and sports communities, and now he serves Hoosier families as a sales agent with Scott Golan's insurance group. He likes tending to his yard, spending time with his children at sporting events, and his favorite place, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He has degrees in biology and chemistry and from UIndy here in Indianapolis, and a graduate degree in college student development from University of Wisconsin. So please help me welcome Brian Tomlinson.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it a great deal. And fellas, thank you for being here. I'm super grateful that you've chosen to be members of this Fraternitas community. I'm super grateful that you've chosen to accept your role, your vocation as whether actually a father to children these days, maybe as a grandfather or a papa, an uncle, a godfather, or a spiritual father to those whom you mentor, you supervise, you coach, you train, that you support. I'm super grateful that all of you have accepted that. In this world where we are constantly distracted, something's always competing for our attention. You made the choice this morning to get out of bed early, to show up. The breakfast certainly helps. Thank you very much, Mr. Sam. But you made the choice to come here and invest in yourself, invest in your community, invest in your families, invest in those that God has entrusted to you because you care. That matters. Whether you're raising young children, guiding adult children, mentoring students, coaching, etc., or simply just trying to invest in the next generation alone, your presence says something really important. You desire to become the man God created you to be. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. Not how we're going to become perfect men, not how we're going to become successful, but how we are going to strive to become men of mercy. Just quickly, briefly about me. That was a very kind introduction from Mark, and it was mostly true. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway is my favorite place on earth. Notre Dame is right behind it. But when I think about my core identity, it's been this for a very long time. Even before I actually was a husband, even before I actually was a father. I've always been a son to my dad, Ed, over there, my mom, Susie. I've been a brother to Jenny, Mary, Catherine, and Bob. At least those are the ones I know about. And I've been a Catholic. I've been a Catholic for my whole life. But beyond just being a Catholic, I'm a Christian. I'm a child of God, and so are you all. I have a handful of friends here in the room here who ask me, hey, can I really come to this? You invited me, I'm not Catholic. Absolutely. We're all men of God. We are all called to become the better versions of ourselves. And that's what I've been trying to do for 46 years now. And this is who God has called to be entrusted to me in my life. My wife, Kristen, they're enjoying breakfast at Sully's Grill, Mother's Day a year or 2 ago. My son, Eddie, there in the bottom left, who will be a rising junior at Chatard, pretty decent little wrestler. Our son, Patrick, who's 13 on the right, he does all the things, including working out right now at 6 a.m., probably just finished up because we bribed him if he does a 6 a.m. workout, he gets to go hang out with me and pack off for the rest of the weekend. So that's what he's doing. And my daughter, Grace, who is 8, she's going to be playing CYO kickball for the first time this year, and I am super excited about that. And we have a 4th child, Violet, who intercedes for us in heaven. I'll talk about her in a little bit. I grew up in Indiana. I played sports, like many men. Through those activities, I always tried to become a better version of myself. I wasn't a great athlete, but I loved being an athlete. I liked being a part of the locker room. I liked having coaches. I liked working hard. There's still days when I still think about when life gets tough. I'll say to myself, it's 3rd down. You've just got to get 3 yards here. And some of you have those moments in your life where you go back to something and what's my core, right? how do I get 3 yards? How do I just drive a little bit further? How do I support my team? How do I impress my coach? How do I make sure that my dad is proud of me? I need 3 yards here. Do your job. And so that's always been at the core of who I am. Professionally, I spent over 2 decades working in higher education, administrative investigations. I was at UW La Crosse, Ball State, Boston College, Ohio State, don't judge me for it. And I met a girl who was working there. Later became my wife, so I joined her. And then IUPUI, which ultimately put me in charge of significant responsibilities across all 9 IU campuses. Over 20 years working in university housing, God directed me to student conduct, sexual misconduct, Title IX issues, behavior intervention, threat assessment, all the things. I was the guy that you did not want to see on campus. Something was going really poorly for you if you came and saw me. There were many people who thought I was Dean Warmer, and those of you that have seen the movie Animal House know this scene. Some of you are old enough to have probably lived this scene. I was the one that people worried about was going to stand in front of you and say, fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life, son. But the reality was the work I was doing, and many colleagues like myself, was actually very pastoral. When allegations surfaced on a campus, when things got really, really difficult, the job that I had and my teams had were to neutrally uncover facts, determine responsibility, and help institutions respond in the right way. When crisis emerged, I was one of the very few people who were expected to walk right in the middle of that crisis and be the coolest head in the room. And I did that pretty well. I enjoyed it. In fact, I did it so well, I was recruited to join an organization in 2018 that was being formed to support our Olympic community. I was recruited to join the United States Center for Safe Sport. We were the group that was being formed to investigate all forms of abuse in the Olympics. So think Larry Nassar, gymnastics, swimming, all of those things. At first, when I was being recruited, I told them, no, I don't think I want to live the comfort of higher education. I was raising my family here in Indiana. I always desired to be a husband, father, brother, son, Catholic, and Hoosier, raising my children here, but this job was going to require me to uproot the family and move to Colorado. And I'm sure the mountains were going to be pretty and all that, but that was 1,000 miles away. And I really wasn't sure I wanted to do that. But one of the big sales pitches that they threw at me was, think of an institution that has more influence on our culture than sport. You'd like to say, on Super Bowl Sunday, in the United States or throughout the world, everybody's eyes are focused on going to Mass. The reality is, though, in this culture, what was happening in the Super Bowl probably had greater influence. What was happening in Final Four weekend probably had greater influence. I'd like to see that change, I'd like to see that reverse, but the big sales pitch actually kind of got to my pride now that I think about it years later, is look at how big an impact you can have. So I was employee number 26 for the U.S. Center. I certainly had never joined a nonprofit organization before. I had never been part of an upstart, and that was a lot of fun. I learned a lot of things. Ultimately, without too much delay, I was promoted to the Director of Investigations. I was the first Director of Investigations of an organization that's never existed in the history of humanity. No other country had ever tried to approach abuse in their Olympic sports movement like we, the United States, have. Unfortunately, I'm very, very proud of the work that we did. A number of other countries are trying to replicate that now. Ultimately, it ended up being a lot like being the first head coach of the first NFL team that ever existed. You either were going to retire from that job, or at some point a new GM was going to come in and say, I think I'd like a defensive-minded coach as opposed to the offensive-minded coach. And I came to that realization before my time ended, but I knew that this was a significant call. But it was heavy work. We eventually moved back home to Indiana. I was doing this work investigating all forms of child sexual abuse you can imagine, right there in my house with my kids running about, and that got hard. But as you know, those 2 decades passed. I ended up, and my team in particular, working on some of the most difficult situations you might imagine. In many ways, over those 2 decades, I spent the entire time in the underbelly of some of humanity's most cherished institutions. Schools, universities, sports, organizations built on hopes, dreams, opportunity. I was dealing with the places where sin and selfishness, brokenness, and evil sought to destroy those things. Man, let me tell you, the devil is very, very busy in sports. He's very, very busy in the educational environment. And my job and my team's job was to work in the underbelly of that, to try to help people learn from the mistakes, get better, grow, and ultimately become productive members of the institutions that we still want to hold dear. I got pretty good at that work over that time. I surrounded myself with really good people. We were pretty successful at it. I was very, very proud of what we did. I ultimately, humbly I offer, I was considered an expert in the work that I did. However, over that time, as our marriage crept towards double digits and the kids did the same, life got very, very full. You might actually think this is a picture created by AI. It's not. My neighbor Ray, raise your hand here. He actually took this picture of my family from his front porch just a few months ago. I just colorized it for the photo, for up here, so that actually happened. Thank you for being here, Mr. Ray. But life got really full. Kids got older, life gets busy. Sweet young boys become ornery teenagers. That beautiful woman there in the Girl Scout apron, who I fell in love with and pledged my life to, who was not going through perimenopause at that time, is now. And if that relates to you, you know what that transition is like. So we'll leave it there. You know, the success I was having professionally did not necessarily translate into the success I was having as a father. In a lot of ways, I knew that going into being a father and husband, though. Those were going to be 2 different lanes of my life. I thought what success as a father was going to look like. I had a great example of my dad. I had a pretty good idea what success was going to look like at work. However, as I was getting better at my work, and helping others learn from their mistakes, become more productive members of society, I wasn't necessarily growing in the way that I should in those other areas of my life. I don't know that I was failing as a father and husband. In fact, I had plenty of people saying, hey, you're doing a great job, keep it up. But in my heart, I knew something wasn't developing in the right way. I knew there's something that I wasn't listening to God, and I wasn't sure what it was. Then, honestly, several months ago, really a little bit over a year, for us in our house, life got really, really hard. I got rerouted. Our family got rerouted. It was as if someone put a GPS in our car of life and set it in a different direction, and I could not take that GPS out. I couldn't disable it. All we had to do was just keep following it. There was career setbacks. For 8 months, I found myself trying to figure out what the next step was in my career. There were family struggles, significant financial struggles, hospitalizations, unexpected home repairs, vehicle repairs. Pretty sure I'm going to find out today that our van is totaled. There was a loss of a pregnancy. Sweet Violet, our daughter, she intercedes for us in heaven now. I certainly didn't expect to get pregnant at 45, but we did. And now she intercedes for us. So many different things coming at me, coming at our family. Maybe some of you have been through seasons of life like that. The kind of season where you stop asking, what am I to do next? Instead, start asking, Lord, who are you calling me to become? For me, the daily work throughout that time has been seeking about an answer to this question. I already developed a pretty disciplined prayer life, very often with the help of many of you in this room, actually, and I appreciate that. And I think that disciplined prayer life helped save our family a little bit throughout that time. But it was time for me to turn back the clock a little bit, get back to some fundamentals, get back to that athletic mind I talked about earlier. It was time to start seeking counsel from trusted men, work with mentors, coaches. I dialed in my network. My daily work became my prayer. I set goals, I reflected, and I spent time trying to understand what God was teaching me through those challenges. And eventually, one goal emerged above all the others. Not to become more successful, not to become wealthier, not to become more respected in whatever it was I did next, but to become a man of mercy. At first I really wasn't sure what that meant, but that goal kept coming back more and more. The more I prayed, the more I reflected, the more I thought, that term kept coming forward. I just needed to clarify, I needed to seek some guidance on really what that was going to mean in my life. So I eventually hired a coach. I was approached by a fellow named Jim Harshaw, who has a program called Reveal Your Path, and it's for like-minded men who, again, were former athletes, but just have that drive about them, that just want to be better men. And I joined his coaching program. I have my own individual coach, Brian Michael is his name, a good Christian man, a good Christian father from Columbus, Ohio. And we spend quite a bit of time working together on dialing in on our vocation, on my vocation. And I actually wrote down the goal, become a man of mercy. And I have certain action steps I have to follow every day. Some of the action steps are coming to Fraternitas, going to monthly confession, being intentionally curious with the kids, more active listening with Christy, setting clear action steps and having accountability partners to make sure I'm following through. Just like I did as a young athlete, I had coaches and mentors. I have those things now. And shortly after that period of discernment, Mark reached out and asked me to give a talk here. He gave me the list of available talks, and immediately this one jumped right out. I knew that rerouting, the GPS, was sort of gearing towards the direction it was supposed to go. In Matthew 5:7, Jesus says, "Blessed are the merciful, for the mercy shall be theirs." We've all heard that. In fact, this was read at my wedding. The verse hit me differently. Jesus does not say, "Blessed are the intelligent, blessed are the admired, blessed are the successful, blessed are the talented." He says, "Blessed are the merciful." But why is that? Because mercy is at the very heart of God. And if we want to become the men God created us to be, we must learn to become men of mercy. As Mark pointed out at the beginning today, mercy is not weakness. It's not lowering our standards. It's not ignoring sin or avoiding responsibility. It's not avoiding accountability. It's not running and hiding when life keeps punching you, or it's punching your family, and you can't seem to find a way to protect them as the punches just keep getting thrown. Maybe you've been there too. I spent my first half of my career dealing with accountability, dealing with misconduct, dealing with truth, justice, consequences. I know all of those things matter. But I learned something in that space. Accountability without mercy rarely restores anyone. Truth alone may expose the error, but mercy is the only thing that's going to help heal it. Because mercy is love in action, fellas. As Mark rightly pointed out, hard to find a better example than Mother Teresa. But mercy is seeing someone's brokenness and responding with love rather than condemnation. It's having the courage to speak the truth to someone's heart while never giving up on that person. Mercy is exactly what God shares with us. And it's what we are called to do for others. I've spent a lot of time in prayer, in adoration, self-reflection over the last year plus. I've had a lot of time to discern now that I've decided I'm retired from that career addressing misconduct. And I've spent a lot of time asking God, what am I to do next? He's pointed me into the career of insurance. I didn't see it coming. But as Jason and I were just chatting, actually, Jason and Karen are clients of mine, the Holy Spirit gets very, very busy in this work. In fact, my very first client, Steve, approached me to do this work here at Fraternitas. I now get to help people solve problems they didn't even know that they had. I now get to help people prepare for a crisis. Again, still having to be the calmest person in the room, but doing it differently now. And my kids actually now get to see Dad, the actual examples of Dad helping people. Whereas before, there were these 18 million people in the Olympic movement that Dad was helping. They really couldn't figure that out, even though as busy and athletes as they are, they're in the middle of that space, it was sort of ethereal with them. Now they get to see it. God stays very busy in our lives if we let him. He wants to help lead you in the right direction. He wants to be the GPS, but you got to make sure you're paying attention to where it's going. I've come to understand over that reflection time that there's 3 practices I want to share with you today that I think maybe isn't all of the 3 that are necessary to be a man of mercy, but 3 we can start with today. These become clear to me not because I have any great success doing these things, actually because I've failed at these quite a bit. Failure is feedback, gentlemen. The first practice is this: know your role and stay in your lane. One of the most important lessons I learned over 20 years responding to acts of misconduct was to know your role and to stay in your lane. But be devoted to being the very best that you can be in that role. The same thing goes for you as a husband and a father. We men, we love to fix everything. But we are not called to be everything to those whom God entrusts in our care. We are not our wife's career coach. We're not her manager. And if any of you, I won't ask you to raise your hand, but if any of you are doing remote work now, and your wife's on the other side of the wall in your house doing remote work, you know the temptation that's there to try to be more than just husband when you're working in the same space. That's hard. All of us, we are not our children's savior. That's hard. It's really hard. But along with their mother, you, along with their mother, are called to be their first teacher. But they have other teachers. They have other coaches. They have other mentors. I'm very, very grateful, actually, for this particular group. Ron Burlick in particular, he's not here this morning, but he's actually found his way into being a mentor to my oldest Eddie. And I'm really, really grateful for that. I, as a dad, have to learn to step back and let other men become involved in my kids' lives. As fathers, we are not responsible for controlling every single outcome. We have to stay in our lane. But sometimes frustration comes when we're trying to carry responsibilities that are not ours. God didn't give those particular responsibilities to us. Instead, we have to ask ourselves, Lord, what are you asking me to be in this moment? When faced with a crisis in your family, first ask, God, what is my role here? He may ask you to lead. He may ask you to listen. He may ask you to teach. He may just ask you to simply be present. Merciful men discern what God's calling them to do before they react. And no matter what, that action is always rooted in love. The second practice, pulled this from my work in dealing with misconduct. The 3 R's: reflect, redirect, and restore. In that investigative work, our goal was never really punishment for the people I interacted with. It was their growth. It was their learning. It was their development. The same is true for us as fathers. When a child makes a mistake, our first thing is very often correction. I'm super guilty of that, fellas. But I want you to think for a moment about when your child makes a mistake, change your language. In fact, when I was training investigators, and I did it for quite a while, one of the techniques I would train them with is to never ask the question that starts with why. So for instance, if the 16-year-old ends up engaging in some behavior he probably shouldn't have, the temptation is to say, why did you do that? But the other half of the question that goes without saying for every one of us is this: why did you do that? Because you didn't have to. I already committed that sin for our family 20 years ago. Your papa already committed that sin for our family 40 years ago. Your Uncle Bob committed that sin many, many, many times for our family. Right? When you ask the question why, we're trying to get at the heart of their motivation. Sure, I understand. But when you ask the question why, you immediately place them in judgment. Instead, when you approach your child, say, tell me more about that. Help me understand the decision. Help me understand the circumstances. How do we move forward together? Mercy asks us to slow down and encourage us to find out more as opposed to judgment. And then helping them reflect leads to redirection. Help them find alternatives to the choice that they made. Encourage them to lean into others. Find others who can lead them in the right direction. Get comfortable with silence. Let God fill a void in their life as opposed to a bad choice. And then lastly, being a merciful father helps your children seek to restore the harm that was done. I don't know about you, but I still struggle with this myself. Routinely, Peyton, I'm talking to you, you'll be a priest here one day, buddy. I routinely end up in the confessional begging God, please don't let the priest tell me I have to go tell so-and-so I'm sorry. Because restoration is hard. It's hard to restore the harm that's done. But if you can be a merciful father and teach your children, it's important to restore the harm that's done. Whether it's the harm done to someone else or just restoring the harm to the relationship between you and Christ when you sin. That's meaningful. Gentlemen, I think this is exactly how Jesus treats us. Let's look to Peter. He denied Christ 3 times. If there was anyone, except maybe Judas, that needed condemnation, it was Peter. But that's not how Christ responded. After he rose from the dead, he looked at Peter and 3 times asked him, do you love me? 3 times offered the opportunity to restore the harm to the relationship that had been done. Jesus didn't want revenge, he wanted restoration. And that's mercy. Lastly, third practice is build an environment of excellence around you. I steal this from my professional coaching program. This is a big part of what we talk about. But have people in your corner that are going to lift you up. You are all a part of my environment. Hopefully you're all a part to each other's environments too. But no man becomes wholly alone. No father succeeds alone. No husband thrives by themselves. Every meaningful achievement in your life and your children's lives are going to be supported by other people. Otherwise, the achievement wouldn't be meaningful. Parents, mentors, coaches, friends, family members, they all become parts of our environment of excellence. You very often get invited to be a part of an environment of excellence and you don't even necessarily realize it. It happens to me all the time. But men who tell us the truth when we need to hear it lift us up. Other men who have the courage to be merciful with us lift us up. One of the greatest lies Satan tells us is that you can do this on your own, and that's just not true. He designed us for brotherhood. He designed us for unity with our wife, with our children. He designed us to be a communal people that lifts each other up, that directs that GPS towards Him. That is an environment of excellence. I encourage you, as you think about developing your own environment of excellence, to invite the saints in your life. Mark does a great job every month highlighting for us an example of a saint that shows the way of living the Beatitudes. We live in an extraordinary time where some of our contemporaries are actually saints in mercy. St. Faustina, Pope John Paul II, Mother Teresa, Padre Pio, ask them to pray with you. Seriously, I know we sometimes as Catholics get in the habit of saying, oh, I'll pray for you, or I'll ask so-and-so, saint to pray for you, but actually ask the saints to pray with you. I'll tell you a super quick story. I was in New York City in December of 2021. Work was extraordinarily chaotic. I actually just finished 5 days of training on problematic sexual behavior in children. Pretty intense. And I was on my way to the airport, and I decided to stop and get a bite to eat. Someone told me if I go over by Madison Square Garden, there's going to be some pizza. And so I went over that way, and I actually, in the corner of my eye, saw a church, and it said St. John's and Padre Pio Shrine, the relics of Padre Pio. And I've always had this devotion to Padre Pio, and I actually couldn't really tell you why. So I walk in, and there, sitting in a glass case, were one of his gloves that covered the stigmata. And I took my rosary, made by the Catholic woodworker, and I touched it to the case, and I just said, Padre Pio, pray this rosary with me. And fellas, I don't know if I was there for 20 minutes, if I was there for 3.5 hours, but I have never prayed a better rosary in my life. I went somewhere else in that moment. And there was extraordinary chaos, as I mentioned, surrounding us at work. And without getting into a very long story, I walked out, and I'm absolutely confident that Padre Pio got very, very busy protecting me from a great deal of harm that was about to come upon our organization, all because I asked him to pray with me. So, invite the saints into your environment of excellence. Invite the saints into your children's environment of excellence. Study their lives. Teach your children about their lives. Because they're great examples of how we need to follow the GPS that leads towards Christ. One of the practices that I get to thank this group for, particularly Jonathan Conrad, is remembering people in prayer when they actually ask you for it. This is a photo of my wall last night in my office. This is my little prayer wall. And when I was telling Jonathan about going through the sort of struggles we were going through, he said, "Can I pray for you?" And I said, "Yes, of course, please do." But he actually meant it. He had a cork board in his office where he would pin Tomlinson, career search, Tomlinson, whatever, and then would take a picture of it and send it to me. This proof was like, I'm actually praying for you. And so I've developed this practice. So every day when I walk into my office, the first thing I do is I call upon my own environment of excellence. I say, "Blessed Mother, please lead me to your Son. St. Joseph and Padre Pio, please join me on this journey. St. Monica, please pray for Chrissy. St. Augustine, please pray for Eddie. St. Carlo Acutis, please pray for Patrick. St. Bernadette, please pray for Grace. And Sweet Violet, please pray for your daddy." And then I turn to this wall, and I remember everyone who's asked me for prayer. Friends, family, clients, a lot of folks. I encourage you to do the same. Whether it's in your home, in your office, put it on a post-it note and remember that prayer every day. Call upon your environment of excellence. Man, I've asked God to help me understand what I'm supposed to do with this call to be a man of mercy, though. He's been answering it for me, especially over this last year plus, through fatherhood. And I suspect he'll do the same for you if you ask him. We fathers often believe our children need perfection, and they don't. Our children do not need perfect fathers. They need merciful fathers. They need fathers who apologize, fathers who forgive, fathers who listen, fathers who tell them the truth, fathers who call them to a higher standard, fathers who never stop loving them. And maybe most importantly, fathers who know how to receive mercy themselves. Because many of us are carrying some things, sins, regrets, mistakes, failures, moments we wish we could take back. Moments where we knew we fell short. Moments where we worried and might have to go and apologize for that. We often extend mercy to others, but we allow ourselves in our own hearts to reject the mercy that's freely given. But a man cannot become an instrument of God's mercy if we don't invite it into our own lives. Men, why does it say, "Blessed are the merciful"? It's because we desperately need God's mercy in our own lives. We must be merciful because without His mercy in our own lives ourselves, we are going to be falling very short. So I want to leave you with a thought. Who is this fatherhood for? Your calling as father, grandfather, uncle, godfather, spiritual father, teacher, coach, mentor, supervisor. Who is this for? Sure, it's for us. It blesses us, right? It's a great gift to be a father. And it's for our children, absolutely. God has entrusted us to them and has entrusted us, or them to us. It's a great gift. But ultimately, the fatherhood is for His own glory. You didn't get to choose your children. They didn't choose you. If you have teenagers, they remind you of that all the time. But He chose that relationship because somehow in that relationship, the work that's to be done between you and your children, He is to be glorified. Not because you're perfect, not because they're perfect, but because He desires glory in that relationship. Through the victories, the failures, the wounds, the healings, the struggles, and the mercy. Very, very often, I don't know about you, but after a hard day of fatherhood, I might be standing at my mirror and I see this man. If you haven't seen the movie Animal House, and I'm not necessarily encouraging you to go watch it, but on the other side of the Dean Wormer, where he was saying fat and drunk and stupid is no way to go through life, and he was talking to Flounder here. This was the look on his face. But ignore that. Ignore that reflection you see back in the mirror. Instead, reflect not necessarily on the family in the front. Reflect on who's hanging behind you on the cross. Every time you walk into a church, every time you see a crucifix, know that every single pain and struggle and difficulty that God has placed in your life and has called you to be merciful in response to has already been conquered. It's already been defeated. I learned to grow the habit of praying in front of the crucifix. God, take this struggle, whatever it is. Bury it in the cross, or bury it below the cross. And let me, or my children, my wife, whatever, let us rise with you without this burden. And he's answered that prayer many times. So, I'm awfully grateful for the opportunity to be here with you all today. I'm awfully grateful that you share this journey of fatherhood with us, with my family. And I wish you guys the very best in that journey.
Thank you, Brian. Wow, that was great. I love the Post-it notes on the wall. That's something, to take away. Wanted to present you with a gift for being a speaker from Fraternitas, so that your prayer has a pulse. Todd, will you raise your hand? Todd Daly, founder of Fraternitas, and it's a Bluetooth cross that you can send prayers to others, and it's fantastic. So see Todd if you're interested to learn more about that. But thank you again, and let's give it up for Brian. And in April we had